Not too long ago, I published a video, a guideline to purchasing your very first camera should you be interested in the hobby of toy and figure photography. That was a pretty long topic, more than half an hour, and it was only part 1. Today, this video is the part 2 and it is about lenses. So let's say you have already purchased your camera and you felt that the lens, the kit lens which was bundled with your purchase isn't good enough, or you wanted something better. So this video today is for you. I'm going to discuss about what additional lenses you should consider purchasing if you have the budget and you don't know where to start. So let's get started with this part 2 of lens purchase guideline. Hello everyone and welcome to Excogane Blog and Photography. My name is Steven and I shall get going with the topic on hand, lens recommendations for figure and toy photography. When you buy a new camera which comes bundled with a kit lens, the usually 18 to 55 or 16 to 50mm standard zoom lens, there's nothing wrong with using that lens for toy and figure photography, but at the same time, these lenses can be described by the phrase jack of all trades and master of none, which is to say they are good enough, but you are not getting the maximum potential out of the camera you are using because these lenses are not good enough. If you think the kit lenses are producing good images to you, once you use a better lens, even an inexpensive one, a cheap prime lens, you will instantly notice the quality of your images have improved on the back screen of the camera itself. It is very obvious. Also, with kit lenses, the quality of the background blur they produce, the bokeh they produce, they are not very nice to look at sometimes, especially when you go outdoors and you have foliage in the background, foliage, tree branches or leaves. The resulting background blur tend to look very messy or harsh looking. Meanwhile, prime lenses, they tend to produce a background blur that appears much more smoother, even when you're using the same aperture values as the kit lens. At the same time, prime lenses are capable of delivering sharper images compared to what a kit lens is capable of. So there are lots of convincing reasons to buy additional lenses, especially prime lenses for toy and figure photography. So before I move on to recommending lenses itself, I shall describe the 2 important specifications you should be looking out for when you're buying a lens with the intention of using it for figure photography. The very first one is the magnification ratio and minimum focusing distance of a lens. So what is minimum focusing distance? It is the minimum distance between your camera sensor to the object you're planning to take a photo of. So this value is determined by the lens you're using. When you take a photograph of any object, you need to stay a distance away from it, a minimum amount of distance from it, so that your camera will be able to lock focus and take a photograph of it. This is determined by the lens you're using. Every lens have their own MFD value. So why is this so important? Imagine you bought an 85mm 1.8 prime lens for figure photography, but that particular lens has an MFD value of 80 cm or more. It means that you literally have to stay almost 80 cm away from the figure in physical distance just to be able to lock focus and take a photograph of it. Very far away. Now you see where the problem is. If your figure is a small one and not a big one, but you can't get closer to take a photo of it, what will happen? Your resulting photo will be the figure is very small in the middle of the photo. That is magnification ratio. How big an object is reproduced in a photograph. So MFD and magnification ratio, they are related to each other. This is why MFD is so important, because you want to know how near you can get to an object when you are photographing something in close distance. This is especially important for figure photography. So you need to check out the lens spec sheet which is available online, such as dpreview.com, when you're planning to buy a lens, to check out the MFD and magnification ratio. Meanwhile, there is this commonly asked question, do I need a macro lens for toy and figure photography? What is macro in the first place? In photographic terms, macro means one-to-one reproduction or 1.0x magnification ratio. And how much magnification is 1.0 times? To give you guys an idea, we are talking about photographing insects or flowers, which is very small. And obviously the figures you collect are very small. So you do not necessarily need a macro lens to photograph figures, but in the end it boils down to what you collect in the first place. If the figures you collect are small, then you will need a macro lens just to be certain that you can get close enough to a figure. This is where I came up with a set of rules, 3 rules that you can just follow. You can't go wrong with your lens purchase. So I do highly recommend you guys go by this set of recommendations I'm coming up with. Rule number 1, if you're collecting scale figures 1/8, 1/7, 1/6 scale or larger, master grade and perfect grade Gundam kits, then you do not necessarily need a macro lens. You can buy an ordinary prime lens, but the magnification ratio you should be looking out for is 0.15x at the minimum. Do not buy anything lesser than 0.15x. It is useless for toy photography. The resulting figure in your photo will be too small. So 0.15x is what you should be looking out for. Rule number 2, if you collect 1/12 scale figures, including Figma and SH Figuarts, Nendoroids, or anything smaller such as Lego, I do highly recommend you guys buy a macro lens to photograph them. So there are 2 types of macro lenses. Nowadays, there are also half macro lenses which are 0.5x magnification instead of 1.0. Those are also plenty adequate for figure photography for small figures like this. So you should be looking for macro lens if you're collecting 1/12 scale figures or anything smaller. Rule number 3, if you collect large scale dolls 1/3 scale such as Dolphy Dream, then you do not need a macro lens at all. You can buy any lens to do the job, solely determined by your budget and your personal preferences. So that is all you need to know about magnification ratio and minimum focusing distance of camera lenses for toy and figure photography. But before I move on to the second specs, I would like to give you guys an example between 2 similar lenses for 2 different purposes. Here is a pair of 2 lenses with the same exact focal length, Canon 100mm f2 portrait lens and Canon 100mm f2.8 macro. So which one should you choose for figure photography if you have the budget to buy either of these 2 lenses? So this is where you need to look at the minimum focusing distance and the magnification ratio. Obviously, the f2.8 macro is the one you should be buying. Do not buy the portrait lens, the f2. So MFD and magnification ratio very important when you're researching for a lens to buy for toy and figure photography. Okay, now that we are done with the magnification topic, the second specs you should be looking out for is surprisingly simple: focal length. Macro lenses come in a variety of different focal lengths and your choice is solely dictated by your photography style. There is no absolute answer on which focal length is better than the other. What effect does focal length has on your photographs? It mainly affects the background of your photos as well as the foreground. It does not affect the main figure itself that much. So I have a set of examples right here taken from 24 to 35, 50, all the way to over 100 millimeters. And as you can see, the background becomes more and more magnified as you increase the focal length, as you zoom in more. So when you go for longer focal lengths, 70, 100mm, what happens is that the background becomes magnified and simplified. So your photo will look like a professional portrait photo. The foreground, the ground in front will also become very compressed and shorter, so it looks more professional in some way. If you shoot in a studio and you do not have a very large background, then you should consider a long focal length, 70mm or more, to magnify the background so that your setup does not have to be too big. If you make dioramas like I do and you want to shoot the entire scene with your figure in it, you might want to consider a shorter focal length lens such as 35 or 50mm so that you can capture the whole scene and you don't end up magnifying the background too much until nothing is visible. Otherwise, there is no point in making a detailed diorama in the first place. This is why your choice of focal length is determined by your own photography style itself. Now that I'm done with the specs department of lenses, I shall move on to recommending lenses directly before I end this video. Starting off with Canon. Canon has the 40mm 2.8 pancake lens. So this is something even I myself own, even though I'm a Nikon user. I adapt it on my Nikon Z camera. If you go outdoors often and you do not want to carry a lot of weight, then this tiny but sharp lens is something you should consider getting. Alright, moving on. Canon 50mm 1.8 STM. I guess this one does not need any introductions. It is a must-have lens for many people, and it is not just suitable for figure photography, it is usable for portraits of people as well. There's an older version, the 50mm 1.82, which I do not recommend because the build quality is questionable. It feels like it would break any second, and I believe this lens has already been discontinued. You could only find a used one nowadays. For macro lenses, Canon has only two of them and they are fairly expensive. EFS 60mm 2.8 macro and the Canon 100mm 2.8 macro I mentioned earlier, which fetches almost $600 new. So unfortunately, Canon macro lenses, they are fairly expensive, so we shall see what other third-party options we have later. Moving on to Canon mirrorless M-mount cameras, we have the EFM 28mm 3.5 macro for $300. I highly recommend this lens for Canon M series users, M50, M200 users. Please get this lens for toy photography. And then there's the EFM 32mm 1.4, which is almost $500. And this lens, I believe it is a bit overkill for figure photography because you don't need f1.4 for figure photography. At f1.4, everything will be out of focus except for a single eye on the figure, just one eye, not both eyes. So the depth of field is too shallow at f1.4. But if you want something versatile, you want to shoot other things and not just figures, then you can consider this lens. So there are not many options for Canon mirrorless. Sigma and Viltrox, a Chinese brand, they do make autofocus native Canon mirrorless lenses. But unfortunately, all of them have very poor magnification ratios. The lenses of interest are the 30 and 56mm 1.4, and Sigma and Viltrox have similar lenses with the same specs, but all of them have very poor magnification values and I don't recommend them for figure photography at all. Do not waste your money on those. If you need more choices, you can consider these adapters by Canon or by Viltrox, fairly affordable, which you can consider because they allow you to use some Canon DSLR lenses on Canon mirrorless M-mount bodies, your M50 or M200. You can use DSLR lenses with these adapters. Yeah. However, you might want to watch out on the compatibility issues with some third-party lenses, which I shall brief through right now. So coming from third-party brands, you have the Yongnuo 50mm 1.8 as well as the newer Mark II version. These two are the cheapest lenses for Canon DSLRs at the moment. But do take note that they do not work on Canon M series mirrorless cameras even via the adapter. And then you need to know that Yongnuo lenses, their autofocus accuracy are not very good at maximum apertures of f1.8, f2, which you do not use for figure photography anyway. At f2.8, f4, they are great for figure photography. And then the last thing you need to know about Yongnuo lenses is that their flare resistance is fairly poor. Do not shoot directly into a bright light source. Do not shoot directly into sunlight. Your image will have very poor levels of contrast. They don't look great. And then we move on to Sigma. Coming from Sigma, you have the 50mm 1.8 EXDG HSM. And the amazing thing about this lens is the price in the used market, where it is only $200 to $250 depending on the condition. Very affordable. and it is a very sharp lens. I am a former owner of this lens for many years in the past before I upgraded to the art version. This is the new art version, and the art version is 700 or 800 bucks new. I got it for 700. So the predecessor of this model is the EXDG HSM, and you can get it used for under 250 bucks. And this lens is very sharp, the EX version. When you stop it down to f2.8 and you use it all the way to 5.6, which is the best range to shoot figures anyway, a very sharp lens, just that it is very big and heavy, so you might want to think twice if weight is a concern to you. Sigma also have 3 macro lenses, the 50mm 2.8 EXDG macro and the 105mm. These two are fairly old lenses as well. They do not work on Canon M mirrorless cameras via an adapter. And then the newer one, the 70mm DG Art. This one is 600 bucks, but it works on Canon mirrorless cameras, both M mount and the full frame RF mount. So yeah, it is expensive, but the image quality is impeccable, so you pay more for quality. Coming from Tamron, they have a trio of 90mm lenses, and their naming can be rather confusing to people who are still unfamiliar with photography markets and their lenses. So the best way to identify them is via their model number A001, F004 and F017, from oldest to newest. Their prices differ, of course, according to their age and their generation, and my personal opinion is to do not buy the A001, it is too old. This lens came out back in year 2006, but feel free to get the second generation and the third generation model, depending on your budget. What you need to know is that the first two generations, the A001 and F004, they do not work on Canon mirrorless cameras. Only the latest one is compatible. So that is all for Canon lenses. We shall move on to Nikon. For Nikon DSLRs, we have the 35 and 50mm 1.8 for $200 new each. Fairly good lenses at a modest price, so they are no-brainers should you go for either one of them. And then for macro lenses, 40mm 2.8G micro, $275 new. This is the best purchase you can go for if you are a Nikon DSLR user, crop sensor of course, and you need a macro lens. This is a very affordable option which Canon does not even offer. Canon macro lenses are a lot more expensive in comparison. And then if you need something that is full frame, because the 40mm is only crop sensor, you need something full frame, Nikon has the 60mm 2.8G micro for $600 new. For third-party Nikon DSLR lens recommendations, the list is exactly the same as the Canon's, so I will not repeat everything again. And that includes the compatibility issues, they are the same. So only the latest Sigma Art Tamron G2 lenses will work on Nikon Z mirrorless. The older lenses will not work. For Nikon Z, I can only recommend the 50mm 1.8S, which is fairly expensive at $600. But this is one of the very best 50mm lenses in the market, across the entire camera market at under $1,000. So you are paying for quality. Unfortunately, Nikon Z does not have a native macro lens yet, so you will need the FTZ adapter to adapt DSLR lenses on Nikon Z. And this FTZ adapter is fairly expensive at $250 if bought separately. If you bought this adapter with a camera purchase, bundle purchase, then you can get it for way lower, half price of $130. And that is all about Nikon. We shall move on to Sony. For Sony, there are a lot of choices. Sony has their own 50mm 1.8 lens, fetching $250 new. And then they have 3 options for macro, 30, 50 and 90mm. The 30mm is only a crop sensor lens. So you choose one based on your budget or whether you plan to upgrade to full frame in future. You can't go wrong with any of the 3. And then for third-party lenses, Yongnuo also has the 50mm 1.8S DA DSM, which is $120 new, the cheapest 50mm lens for Sony ecosystem. But what you need to know is that I don't recommend this lens that much because the magnification value is only 0.14x. I'm giving this lens a mention just because it is very affordable. but it is not really recommended for figure photography. So what's being recommended by me? To follow up, there you have the Tamron 35mm 2.8 Di3 OSD, Sigma 45mm 2.8 DGDN, and Samyang offers a pair of 35 and 50mm 1.8 lenses. For macro lenses, there is only one from third-party brands, Sigma 70mm Macro Art for $600, fairly pricey as well. That is all for Sony, and lastly, Fujifilm. So I have been a major critic of Fujifilm for many years because their lenses are way too expensive and there are not many options in the market. Things have gotten a bit better now that Viltrox, a Chinese company, is making autofocus lenses for Fujifilm, but for people who are interested in toy and figure photography, interested in macro, you guys are out of luck. There are still very few options at the moment. There are only 4 lenses. So the 2 standard lenses are Fujifilm XC35mm f2, the cheapest one, $200, but unfortunately not very recommended because the magnification is only 0.14x. And then the next one, which is a better option, the Fujifilm XF 50mm f2 RWR. This is a $450 professional lens, but it has a way better magnification value and therefore can be used for figure photography. Fujifilm has 2 macro lenses and they are both very expensive. The XF 60mm 2.8, this is a half macro lens, only 0.5x, but perfectly usable for figure photography. Just that it will set you back at $650. And then there's the 80mm 2.8, costing a whopping $1,200. So you see, this is the problem with Fujifilm lenses. There are no affordable options. Viltrox, they do have 30 and 56mm lenses for Fujifilm, just like they had for Canon EOS M. And the same story all over again. Very poor magnification values, very long MFDs, so they are not usable for figure photography. Do not buy them. So far, all of the lenses I've recommended are autofocus lenses. I have not gone through manual lenses yet, where the list is way too long. There are so many Chinese brands that offer macro manual lenses such as Venus Laowa, Yongnuo, Maker, Mitacon, and more. And then Korean brands as well, IRIX. They make a lot of macro lenses, so there are too many to cover. And the number 2 reason is this video is intended for people who are just getting into photography, newbies, so I do not want to recommend you guys something that is fully manual. So that is all about my lens recommendations for today's video. I'm not getting into Panasonic or Olympus Micro Four Thirds. I'm also not discussing about Canon RF, which is only full frame at the moment. Those are expensive stuff and I don't think you guys, the newbies, are interested in expensive stuff, which is mostly why I did not recommend lenses that cost more than $600 to begin with. So if you guys have any questions regarding lenses and cameras, doesn't matter the price point, feel free to drop a comment and ask. I will get back to you as soon as possible. So thank you very much for watching this video. If you do find this video informative and helpful, please do consider dropping down a like and subscribe to this channel. I shall see you guys again. Thank you very much and goodbye.